We have come to the final session of the conference, so hope you all had a good time and got a lot out of this. And I can't think of a better way to close the conference. I think everything's going to come full circle from Anthony's opening keynote and now to Minister Eddie Husic's closing keynote. So I think the minister was actually here in 2017, so it was almost a coming out to the tech meeting, I think, at that stage. And I think one of the things that he actually expressed was a genuine passion for tech and what it can do for the economy. And I think that's been very clear to see since he's taken over the portfolio, and well done. And if you follow the minister on LinkedIn, I don't know anyone who works harder than you at every event. So we're very delighted to have you here, and I'll pass over.
So I have a 53 slide PowerPoint. We got that one ready. No, I will not be talking from that. It is good to be back, and if I can, just acknowledge the traditional owners, the lands on which we meet, and pay respects to elders past and present. I don't know if I can put these notes here. Is that right? It is good to be back, and it is good to be able to have the chance to catch up with you all, having not been here for a while, and largely, well, that's what happens when you have a global pandemic, right? All the stuff that you want to do gets changed, and being able to have this opportunity to be here with you and for me to return, because as you rightly point out, I was here 5 years ago. Way back then I was a badmouth, opinionated person, and the thing that's changed is I've gotten older, so I'm still very opinionated but always willing to learn, and I think we have to be opinionated in this space, because my bigger concern is around generally the awareness of the issues that we've been considering for many years, and getting those into a broader public frame to be responded to, acted upon. And for a lot of you that have been working in this arena, realising potential is the other thing as well. And are we making some headway? Yes. But I think we've still got, it's all good. I just was finishing up anyway. Questions, anyone? No, I think it's about realising, we've made some headway, but we've got a hell of a lot to do. The pandemic, what I wanted to do today is just give you a sense of where, as an incoming government, our thinking is. What are our priorities? How does that translate in terms of actions, the type of policies that we're pursuing? I was very keen to answer any questions. I don't have a long formal speech. I'd rather just tell you straight, we've been working in this space for so long, and if I can't speak directly and frankly with you on it without having to rely on a whole bevy of notes, I'm not really worth my weight, which is considerable. So the big thing that has shaped thinking within political spheres has been obviously the pandemic, and trying to think through as a result of that. So there's been both the pandemic and obviously geopolitical concerns or considerations as well, and the way in which communities operate. And if I can say to you, at the heart of my thinking is, and what I'm trying to sort of thread this through everything that we do, is basically to recognise, I think we need to do a much better job in this country of recognising the value of Australian ideas and know-how, pairing it with skills and applying it for national well-being. The construction of what I've just said to you is deliberate. That is, we do not do enough of a job, or we continually undersell capability that is developed onshore. We always tend to have in large part, if someone else is doing it, there's validation before we do something. That drives capability development onshore. And the other thing is to breadth the vision. The reason I use that phrase, national wellbeing, is that it's not all about the economics and commercial, but application broader for well-being across a range of different areas. That, in terms of trying to encapsulate philosophy, that's what is at the centre of the way I approach things as an industry minister. Now we have an opportunity to do things now in a way that hadn't been considered prior to the pandemic, and that's why I come to the point about, in terms of digital and tech, for example, like it's taken a hell of a long time for businesses to embrace it and embed it. I'm reading this great book at the moment called System Error by Rob Reich and a number of others, who I never thought in a tech book they would quote Lennon, the revolutionary, not the singer, that said, there are decades where nothing happens and then weeks where decades happen, was the quote. And we did see that through the course of the pandemic in terms of the embrace. When people were their backs were against the wall, they had to think, how do I get things done without people being present? And how do I use technology to make that occur across a range of different functions, is the way that happened. And that did occur, that impetus was there. And we need to continue that. We can't just slouch back into old ways. So we do need to use this opportunity to rethink industry policy, rethink how much is done, what are the capabilities we think are important longer term for the nation's growth and evolution, and to also acknowledge we've got these really big geopolitical pressures on us that have impacted on the way that supply chains work, or in many respects don't, where we've had, largely we've had to draw from one country for the bulk of, in terms of inputs into supply chains. And so that is requiring governments to think differently about the way they approach industry policy. And even saying industry policy within government, this has been a very important lesson as to why I shouldn't have this on, I should have it on silent and on focus. Industry policy was not really discussed. It was not seen as a core component of economic policy, and I think increasingly it will be. The transformative effects of, if you get industry policy right, will have a big economic impact, and so we are, thinking through that as well. So, in saying all that to you, how does that translate in terms of my own thinking as an incoming industry minister, the type of environment we've been through, both as a result of the pandemic and at an international level, and what we've said we do in terms of government policy? I mean, the big thing has been, it's been on two things, as always, capital and human capital, like in those two columns. So on the capital side, the big thing that we've put on the table is a massive co-investment fund. The National Reconstruction Fund, 15 billion, where we pair up as well with super, VC, private equity, means that for the ideas, for those firms that have got a notion that they want to scale up and that they're ready to make a return on investment, we want an independently run National Reconstruction Fund with its own board, similar to the Clean Energy Financing Corporation, but focused on industry across key sectors, value-adding resources, value-adding ag, health, defence, energy, emerging technologies or capabilities, having that layer of capital that's available so that when people are ready to grow, that they do not feel like the only place to grow is offshore because that's where the money's available. So that reconstruction fund, really important. And in the coming weeks, you're going to see us release details on the consultation side. We'll have a specifically dedicated reference group that will drive the consultation and give people the ability to have an input. We announced a range of sub-funds within that National Reconstruction Fund, and particularly, I imagine for your own interest, a Critical Technologies Fund. 1 billion that will be there. Now, I'm looking at it in being able to drive and support, particularly, we've got all this capability, and I know, David, you're here as well in terms of quantum. We have about 17 firms that are focused on quantum technologies in this country. I have said elsewhere, I will fight to make sure that you can grow onshore. I don't want to say don't work with internationals, like that's not the way the world works, but I never want a firm that is developing capability in quantum technology to feel like they're not wanted or can't be supported onshore. So for a range of you, we want to make sure that capital is available. The reforms we want to do on government procurement, for example, which is sort of captured in the Buy Australia plan, and developing specific capability and using government procurement to drive that. That is another initiative as well, where we've had over 3 years, 180 billion of government contracts go out the door. You can question how much of that went to Australian industry. And we're not talking about shortcuts or just lazy government money. What we're talking about is for firms that have got capability, being able to open up those contracts and do it, and to validate that in a number of ways. One, to have like an Act of Parliament that codifies the Commonwealth procurement laws, so that it's like tangible, it's got some grit to back it up. A Future Made in Australia office, housed in finance, but with industry officials in there, to look at the intersection of procurement and capability development and have that driven, and so we can report to that. That will be big, and we will be making announcements in terms of some of the consultation around that in the coming weeks. On the human capital side, the Jobs and Skills Summit that we'll have in early September, we've already started the work on that with about, in the last week, in my own portfolio, about 6 different roundtables that we convene, including in digital and tech skills, AI that Toby was at on Friday with a number of people. We had science and commercialisation, manufacturing, making sure that, so as I mentioned, we're having that layer of capital available for local development and capability development, but making sure we deal with the skills piece as well. So the roundtable starts that work. The stuff that's come out of that gets fed into Jobs and Skills Summit. Coming out of it is a white paper on employment to deal with the needs of industry in terms of skills. And I'm also working with the skills minister, like we are going to have a dedicated approach on tech skills to deal with those chronic shortages that exist. And so there will be a dedicated strategy that Brendan and I will be working on that front. And on that human capital piece, it's about, it's effectively, 5 different avenues that we will need to have. One is obviously the people coming into work, into the labour market for the first time, not just from universities, but I think in terms of vocational pathways as well. And we floated whether or not we ramp up digital apprenticeships. Well, the other thing that I'm keen to explore further and see what we do is traineeships, where you get particularly young people who've expressed an interest, have got a desire to make this something that they want to pursue, combining school and industry placement through secondary school and beyond. So having a look at some of those things as well, and also taking a critical look and seeing what we can do in terms of some of the internships that former federal government, the coalition, started that. I mean, when Angus Taylor was in digital transformation, I did commend them for starting that process of looking at internships within the public sector. Can we scale those up and look at that as another pathway? So it's people coming in, it's internal, like within the labour force, people that are looking at digital and tech as a potential career change. I met someone recently at the Tech Council hosted a sort of expo in Parliament House where I met one person who'd gone from hospitality into IT, going from cook to a coder in one leap. But they had said through lockdown they needed to look at different pathways for work. And what do we do in terms of that internal transfer, and how do we scale that up? Skill migration will be another piece as well. And so we're talking through what we do, and I've been quite vocal about the need for us to have more skilled migration come in as well. The other is, we've got a lot of people that are looking to leave the workforce, having been in for quite some time. Can we delay retirement and improve the mentor and skills transfer play as well? And finally, what do we do for Australians that left because they felt like they didn't have a future here? Can we bring Australians back? And it's why I've been making that point as well. So again, having breadth in terms of the response and doing that. So those are some of the things that we are definitely looking at. But I have to say, I saw a piece that the Governance Institute put out last week. Government can do so much, right? And we do want to do a lot, make no doubt. made no mistake about that. But when I do see reports, the business still doesn't, and in corporates, they still haven't got their head around the impact of technology and the way that will transform businesses, and whether or not they have people on their boards that are thinking this through. I remember talking with Vivek Kundra, who was with Salesforce, but before that was in the Obama administration. He made this point years ago that he always thought the indicator of success for a company is if he looked at the board and whether or not someone had a tech background on that board, right? So, the former government took ages to get their act together on AI and quantum, and the only time you could engage them is if they could beat their chest on whether or not it was a national security priority. Economic security is just as important, and being able to use technology in ways that improves the efficiency or the ways in which it makes life better for communities is important too. But on AI and quantum, it took a hell of a long time to get together on that. Robotics is another area too, where there's no really fully formed approach on robotics in this country, and so having met with Robotics Australia, I've said to the department we need to scale up an approach that has a national approach in terms of robotics. But really on the technology side, if we don't have, there are a lot of people in the academic space that are thinking a lot about this in the science and research communities. We have people in government that are thinking it through, and there are others in the different agencies that I'm responsible for. But really, if we don't get our act together and we continue to see our economic complexity, that we slide down those rankings as we saw the other month, there seems to be a complete obliviousness to the notion. I think, and I use this in very simplistic terms, which I'm happy for you to criticise me for, but economies will either be makers or takers. We are either going to use our brains to do things differently and to increase that complexity within an economy, or we're just going to import like someone else's idea. And this is the stuff, for example, that Hawke did 30 years ago in setting up the CRCs was driven by a concern primarily that we import so much technology and we lose so much of our talent. 30 years ago, like 1989, it was his 1990 campaign speech where he talked about setting up the CRCs, but addressing that very issue. Manufacturing self-sufficiency, we're the lowest in the OECD. That's the harsh reality. The complexity issue I've already touched on. We do need to think of ourselves more than just, with the greatest respect to our friends in resource as a hole in the ground. We do need to change that, and that work is going to be mighty, and we need a lot of people working in unison on it. So from our perspective, as an incoming government, getting that right, and a lot of the work has been about doing the stuff that we said we would do. We've got that agenda, it's out there. But there is also other stuff that we will need to scale up, like I've said, in different areas, be it the robotics strategy, the chief scientist, I've got her working on the national quantum strategy as well, and then having a hard look at what's being done in terms of AI, looping those together and working on a sort of purpose-driven approach on issues that exist out in the community or economy. That will be really important, and trying to see that sort of evolve and grow over the course of the next 3 years, which is what we've effectively got before the next election we go back to the people. That's really a priority for us. So apologies if that is a very wide-ranging journey through thinking and what's going on in my head, but I just wanted to give you a sense from my own perspective how we're approaching things, why we're doing the things that we are, and also stressing that there will be, and one of the biggest things, I'll end on this point, I made this comment at all the roundtables we did. Some of it was discussed purely through the narrow lens of skills development and the human capital side, but it was also an opportunity to have a wider discussion about where we go on industry policy more broadly. That will keep going. But I'm adamant that across all the areas I'm responsible for, there will be a consultative approach, a genuine one that will not be, you've got a few days to respond to this paper and blah, blah, blah. It will be an ongoing discussion and dialogue, because I do think that we, in terms of the scale of the things that we're trying to deal with, our greatest chance of success is being able to have a much more unified approach to dealing with these problems than a top-down one, which frankly, without being too partisan, is my take on where we've been for the last 9 years. So I'll leave it at that, but I'm more than happy to answer any questions.
Okay. I kind of asked this at the beginning of the conference, so sorry. It says there you're Federal Minister for Industry and Science, yet you've not mentioned the environment, which is pretty much collapsing, and it seems to me you're probably the best person in the country to fix it, and maybe invest in green technology.
Did you hear that, Chris Bowen?
Well,
Yes.
and with technologies, you know.
Hey, I don't mind the call. I'm happy for you to make the call. Go on. Sorry, I interrupted.
But Anthony Murfett, he said he actually was working on it but didn't tailor it to his speech, but he also kind of said, oh, that's the environmental team's work. But, I mean, the industry and science and all the industries you're talking about, this is your opportunity, and you're
Sure.
the only one who can actually do this and build a new industry and do a transition to, say, my big drum is green hydrogen, but you've not even mentioned any of the environment,
Sure.
which is one of the biggest problems facing not just people's or communities, but the economy as well.
Yeah, okay.
It's affecting people in this room.
No, that's fair enough. That's fair enough.
I guess it's, why aren't you mentioning it on these speeches as a headliner? And do you kind of see that as the environmental team's, I guess it's up to them to fix it, or how much is it up to you?
No, that's a fair question. So there's a number of ways I'd answer it. So, like we were elected with a very big focus on climate change, emissions reduction, changing the way we generate energy from a range of different sources, not just solar and wind, but as you pointed to, with respect to hydrogen as well, making that happen. We were one of the first oppositions in a long time to actually model the impact of our policies, and within that modelling, we contained our commitment through the National Reconstruction Fund that I mentioned. I mentioned energy and emissions technology in a very quick manner, so I understand entirely you picking me up on that point. But within that section of work, we've dedicated $3 billion towards supporting the development of new technologies through the National Reconstruction Fund that'll sit in the portfolio that I hold.
Is that the best place for it, though?
Well, I'll come to it for another thing. So we've put $3 billion in there. The reason why we've had those sections, if I may say, is because we took on board what the CSIRO said, will be future, it'll be focuses for any economy and industry policy long term, and energy and emissions technology was in there. And we looked at it, if I may say, to answer your question about is it the right place. Everyone will often, gravitate back to, we had the brains and the ideas to develop solar technology, and then all the manufacturing went offshore. So where we can manufacture, we want to be able to have the NRF to support the evolution and support those firms that want to scale up the manufacturing effort, be it on hydrogen or other developments, because there's a lot still happening on solar as well. We do want to have that. In terms of where it sits, as the other point I would make to you is, if you look at the Clean Energy Financing Corporation, there's 10 billion in there, paired up with the 3 billion we want to direct through industrial and manufacturing capability onshore through the National Reconstruction Fund. So there is a mighty whack of money that can be paired up with what the states are doing. I take on board what you're saying, and I'm more than happy to emphasise that more in other speeches, but given the audience has sort of made a calculation about the type of issues that I'll cover off. I do want to assure you that we do take that seriously. We do have, for example, the CSIRO thinking a lot on it, and they've just released the Gen Cost report just a few weeks ago that talked about the fact that renewables offer us the most efficient, cheapest way for energy generation as opposed to other options that are being canvassed. So we do have that as well, but it is something that we've made a priority as a government, obviously legislating the 43% by 2030 and net zero longer term, and we will talk more about that as well. The other things I'd point to you, the other thing that I think a lot about is the application I mentioned, in terms of AI, robotics, quantum. Using that in ways for some of the challenges that we've got, like we're talking about energy generation in terms of emissions, but the others are transport and ag. So on transport, we've said, we're doing a lot with respect to, you've seen what we're doing on EV, but in terms of local manufacture, and particularly on battery manufacture, to drive electrification, we announced during the campaign we do the battery manufacture precinct. We've not really had a serious approach. I was going to say fair dinkum, but that's so hokey. We haven't had a serious approach on battery manufacture in the country, though we've got some of the best deposits of those critical minerals. So we said that we'd focus on that and develop a longer term battery manufacture strategy, not just on EV, because the big part of this, guided by what the Future Battery Industry CRC has said, is energy storage systems for residential, commercial, industrial. How can we scale up that manufacturing effort? And again, the stuff that we've announced through the National Reconstruction Fund is designed to support some of that too. So to deal with transport and energy generation and the storage issue, really important. And on ag, like how do we feed the world in a climate that is markedly changing before our eyes? And how do we meet protein needs that doesn't involve just the standard form of meat processing, the alternative proteins that can be developed? That's another thing that we do want to look at and scale up in terms of development, and having the science, research, industry effort combine in, and using AI and quantum to do that, and potentially come up with new ways of developing much more efficient fertilizer for agricultural application, robotics to deal with some of the issues that concern around the chronic labour shortages that exist in there, or that can be used to do a much more efficient way of weed management or other processes as well that do have an environmental impact, and do that better is something else that we can look at. So there is a lot of stuff that we do think through, but it's always a challenge to cover it off in a group like this. But I assure you, it is something that is being given genuine, concrete consideration. And I promise not to answer all my questions that long.
So you've just started.
That's a politician's promise.
You've started. You've started a review of the critical technologies list today. I was wondering if you could elaborate a bit more on why you've done that. Is that sort of a refocusing of the narrative around national security and economic opportunity? Yeah, can you speak to that?
Yeah. So there was a commitment, and I was happy to follow it through when it was released in November last year, that in 1 year's time from that, the new list to be issued. So we want to meet that time frame, and we need to do that. We need to start that consultation now. We will consider longer term, the frequency of the release of that list, but that's something that will shake itself out through the course of the development of this update. I do want that list to do a number of things. One is to recognise there are a lot of technologies that can add value to Australian society. There are about 63 technologies on that list, grouped up into different areas. But there are also some that if we don't think them through, or we don't have the regulatory settings right, could be of concern. So we want to be able to have, I'm not utopian or dystopic when it comes to technology. We want to find that middle path, but we do want to make sure that, one, we're sending the signal that these are technologies of high value. Two, what do we think through in terms of the regulatory frameworks around them? And three, back some of that stuff up, how do we embed that in other work? So for example, the Critical Technologies Fund I referenced, adding an important knowledge base that can feed into thinking around investment by the National Reconstruction Fund into those critical technologies is really important. And I do want to change it from just being, and in doing so, can I just stress, obviously national security, very important. Those issues, defence considerations are vital, but there are also a number of other applications for this technology beyond just that. And my big criticism has been, as I reinforce a point I made earlier in my contribution to you, it seemed like you can only get the coalition to think about AI or quantum if it came in an AUKUS framework. Well, there's more to it than that. And I want that to be widely discussed. And to deal with that issue about business awareness around technology, that's why I want to have this consultation and done in this way, and to continue it, because I don't want it to slip off the radar. So we've opened that consultation up. It'll close in late September and give people in the critical technologies group that's moved out of PM&C into industry, which is great, because I'm an empire builder. No, that's not the official reason. I don't want that written up.
Too late.
I knew it. I knew it. But if I can say, it is good to have that in there because it does give that wider remit and wider perspective, and to make sure that that's taken into consideration. So we're hoping to release that and have the PM release that in November.
Looking at the science component there more, it tends to be historically lumped in with industry, and science is seen as about technology. Can you talk about what's happening, what's being looked at in pure sciences?
Yes.
The blue sky stuff.
Yeah, okay. So a number of things. The PM was very, I would love to claim credit for the portfolio name, but it was really the PM's, like he wanted it set up this way, to send the signal. It's about, the ideas translating into that outcome.
He's not the first to do that by any means,
Okay, well, you might want to have that conversation with him and let me be there. I'll be there with the popcorn. He always takes that advice real well. Fortunately, I'm talking to the media and this isn't going to go anywhere. No, but he was very focused on making that point, and we did want to send a clear signal too that we valued the input in terms of science and some of that, as I said to you before, that we should value local ideas, Australian ideas, and put them to work. And so hence the portfolio. There are a number of things, if I can say, the national science priorities have not been refreshed since 2015. And we will be making announcements about that in the coming weeks. There's the national science statement to give a sense of where we're headed. Hasn't been updated since 17. And the investment in research, I mentioned earlier our economic complexity and us sliding down the ladder. We're 1.79% of GDP, the amount of money that we invest in research.
Yeah.
The OECD average about 3. I'm sure you'll be able to find a much worse figure. But can we just agree that we've got to lift it? And so there will be some longer term work that needs to be considered about lifting the rate that we invest, not just as an economic measure, but it's saying something about, backing in local ideas. And it's not just about, commercialisation is important, but basic research is too. And so getting that right. You've seen my colleague Jason Clare talk about that and looking at the way in which we want to stop some of the behaviours around the Australian Research Council and the grants processes there. And can I just say, I was very specific on not announcing yet another bloody review into commercialisation in this country. We've had 60 of them. We've done enough on it. And I'm not announcing it here either, and it's not going to be announced anytime soon. But can I make this point on commercialisation?
So it's happening in secret.
Pardon?
So it's happening in secret.
Yeah, my the secret minister that's been appointed, that's their job, apparently. That's what I hear. No secret minister. So I really shouldn't say those things. Why do you make me do this? I blame you. On commercialisation. So I say to industry, can we not blame the universities for all the problems in commercialisation? And the universities, can you not say it's all industry's fault? Can we just accept we've all been really bad at it and we can all do better, right? And can we just work together to lift? And I think there's been some genuine movement on this. Universities do want to engage. And there are some in industry that want to as well. And we do need to, a bit of positive reinforcement, highlight some of the things that have worked well where they have. And make that and scale that up, but I'm just not interested in just continuing that war that we've seen, that rolling brawl that happened through the last 9 years, where universities were to blame for everything. I think we do need to find a way to engage those ideas. So one of the mechanisms that we announced through the campaign to help potentially with university students that do have an idea is to give them an extra year to develop it at university through accelerators and incubators. It's what we term the startup year. So if university students want to stay on an extra year, we will extend HEX by that year to provide them the capital support to progress that idea. So that's up to $11,000. There will be debt, not equity, but I actually think for a lot of them, they don't want someone to have equity stakes so early in their development. but to allow them to do those purchases or to do those things with a university-based accelerator or incubator, to commercialise, bring those ideas to life, and to do so in a way where they might have a greater chance of longer-term success. And again, that consultation around Startup Year will happen in the coming weeks. Jason Clare and I will be doing that work. The legislative work isn't much, it's just a slight tweak to the HEX legislation that governs it. But we do want to progress that as well and send the signal that setting up firms based off your ideas, that this is valued by government and that entrepreneurialism in that way is valued by government as well. And I think that's an important signal to send.
Just on the manufacturing grants review, can you give me, one, what was your concerns with that? Why did you order that review? There's the status, I understand maybe it's completed and it's found direct involvement by the PM or the former PM. Does that jeopardise potentially $800 million plus worth of grants? And yet what happens next? Are they in question, or do those recipients get that money?
So I was concerned about that last year, and I wrote to the then Prime Minister in July when I learned that the grant rules had a requirement that the industry minister make the recommendation of the PM and that the PM make the final call, so he wrote. And obviously, their view was there's nothing to see here, it's all fine, but we'd had that backdrop of all those other rorts and the failure to respect taxpayer dollars and the way that they're applied. And so we were concerned about it, and this was a $1.5 billion program that was announced in October 2020, where nothing went out the door in October 2020, a little bit went out in 2021, and surprise, surprise, the lion's share of it went out in 2022, right before the federal election, at a time where we had so many manufacturers under pressure because of lockdowns, the number of lockdowns that occurred, the number of COVID waves, and it really should have happened a lot sooner. And on that last round, the collaboration round, they made people work over Christmas as they were coming out of lockdown and then going into Omicron, and people had to work and put that in only to see long wait and then it get announced in the election. So my view was I wanted to review any contracts that have been signed, we would honour, and that's absolutely the case. We're not tearing up any contracts that have been signed. The two things that were notable: one, they made the announcements and didn't get to contract stage, and two, all the people who were unlucky, they mentioned all the people who were selected, but all the unsuccessful applicants, not one of them, I don't think, was told that they were unsuccessful. They left that to the incoming government to deliver all the bad news when they delivered all the good prior to the election. So we did want to go through and we did want to see the shape of what's gone on. That review we're working through internally. I'm not going to give any outcomes of that, if you don't mind. And there's yourself, and this morning in morning radio I had the same thing put to me, and I declined the opportunity to tell you that. But to your point about, are there any at risk? I am very conscious that people worked on these things, they shaped them up, they're designed to help industry and business, and we don't want to make any rash decisions that have an impact, and I don't want to do what the other government did, which is politicise the process. We want people to have confidence about the way that the decisions are being made, and I am very aware that there is a jobs impact on some of these as well, and some of the ones that were announced were quite good. So we want to be able to take an evidence-based, decent approach to that.
Ed,
Sorry, can you introduce yourself?
Swanee.
Ah, right, okay. God, I'm going to pay for that later, aren't I? I know David Swan, everyone. I'm just kidding.
The former government, your mate Josh, was quite hard on big tech, kind of surprisingly, the media bargaining code, things like that, which we're very grateful for. What will your own approach be when it comes to quote unquote big tech, US big tech, when it comes to sort of tax or things like the bargaining code, for example, things like that?
Well, Josh had a lot of encouragement from a number of media companies. I might make that point clear as well. They were very focused on big tech through that particular pathway, and I do think I mean, I made reference to this a moment ago. I'm not all tech is the saviour or tech is the villain. There are some things that we do need to take into account in terms of the application, and that's why we bring out the critical technologies list for consultation. There's a lot of good that can come from from application of technologies, but we do have to be mindful. I think the social media and some of the stuff that was discussed through the course of that, the way that algorithms work, to what end, that is an important social discussion to be had. There's another discussion to be had about, has this genie well and truly gotten out of the bottle, and will we be able to do stuff? Because a lot of the people have put together, the whole discussion around, let's understand how open it up and understand how it works. Deep learning and the way that operates, if anyone can explain that simply, and be able to explain the way that algorithms make decisions, that will be a very noble cause, and might not be I think a lot of us will be interested to see how that works. So it will be a challenge, but it is it's not one that we can resolve from. When it comes to AI, I think governments and businesses have a role to play in terms of thinking through the ethical application of technology. I think that is absolute, and I think there's an expectation of the public too about how that occurs, and that thinking does need to happen and scaled up. And that's why I mentioned I was concerned about the sort of reports about the lack of awareness or depth of knowledge within business around the use of technology or otherwise. And if it's just rushed in without thinking through frameworks, that's a concern. So, yes, absolutely, in terms of big tech and thinking through the way they work is important. The way it works in smaller businesses is important too. That's why, for example, as much as we're encouraging firms to embrace at smaller, medium enterprise level technology, what are some of the frameworks they have in place? How secure is their data? What's the cyber policies that they have? You can have the best cyber systems in the world, but if you're leaving your password on a post-it note on your desktop, you can see the handbrake being pulled up right there. So, and the problems begin. So, yeah, we do need to have that type of thinking through, but do it in a way that doesn't, scare people into not embracing the benefits that can accrue by using technology in a clever way.
Yeah, just on the battery precinct up at Gladstone and the ramping up of manufacture there, presumably solar as well, whatever. Do you think we can do that competitively, given firstly some of our rare earth natural resources, the processing of them is done by foreign-owned companies like in lithium, China and the US. And secondly, I guess the setting up costs compared to countries like Indonesia and Asia. Can we produce batteries and other solar equipment competitively compared to importing them?
I'd answer that in a number of ways, in a yes and no way. Well, sorry, a sort of, yes and no way work. So if you look at the type of skill sets required in the automation that's occurring in cell manufacture, I'm looking at one part of the value chain here. It's, a lot of the work, and again, I sort of take my cues from some of the thinking that's been done by others, notably the CRC in this space. They say that the remuneration equivalent's comparable to what's happening overseas. So we're not, when people say, we can't do manufacturing because our labour's too costly, well, in actual fact, for the skill levels required, we can compete, which is a good thing. And automation has transformed that proposition significantly. The challenge is building the construction, our construction costs relative to others, there is a big difference there. And so that's why we put forward 100 million in equity as an injection for that precinct up in Gladstone and working with the Queensland government. So it's a partnership with them where they've identified state development land and they're willing to work with us on infrastructure and skills development. And we want to put in an industry growth centre to work with other firms that want to scale up their ideas as well. It's been a successful model and we want to continue it through there. So there is stuff that can be done, and we deliberately put it in Gladstone because I visited two of the Tesla gigafactories in January this year, one at Reno and the other in Austin that's being developed. and the one in Austin is it's big enough to fit 3 Pentagons. It's that big. The one in Reno, they have Panasonic working alongside Tesla, 7,000 employees at Tesla, 6,000 at Panasonic, and obviously working in with established players. And if we can do likewise with that precinct, we definitely will, because we've got some big names in our region from either South Korea or Japan that we could work in with on that tech and to speed that up at scale. So we are looking at a number of things, and Gladstone's in terms of Gladstone itself with its deep water port, means you can move these batteries out quickly. And there's also a lot of work being done in energy. If you look at hydrogen in Gladstone with what Fortescue are doing, there's a clustering effect in there that we want to take advantage of when it comes to energy. So that's why we're thinking through what we're doing with the precinct. We do think there's opportunity there. Sure, there's a few challenges as well to overcome, but we do really need to lean in. The processing part that you've mentioned will be a challenge as well, because we're so heavily dependent on one country in many respects to do that. But a lot of state governments are thinking through what can be done there. And the NRF, and again coming back to the point I raised earlier in response to your question, and in terms of the respect of asking why we would have it in our NRF as opposed to others, is what can we do? We've got a specific $1 billion sub-fund in NRF for value add in resources, which might give us the ability to pair up with some of the thinking from an industry perspective to make that a reality. Now I think I'm already late, but if there's any other question on yes, no, last one.
Hi. Within government, obviously tech touches almost every ministry, every portfolio.
Yeah.
There's that need for people to champion tech and how it works.
Yes.
Is there a good atmosphere? And often it seems across the aisle, right, that the tech champions get that we need to push things forward. Do you see, within both sides of politics, that sense that the people who get this stuff really do like to try to work together and educate the other people in there who don't get it?
Well, I don't think the former government was really good at that, which is a pity. But I have said, I don't care what side of politics you're from, if you're committed and work in the national interest, I'll work with you. And so there are some people, I was really sad to see Victor Dominello make his announcement, because he's someone I talk to from time to time, I've got a lot of regard for, and I'm willing to work with. And I've said that to other, I'm kind of grateful that there are a lot of state governments that are my political hue, but for the ones in New South Wales and Tas, I've had really good dealings with them, and I am absolutely and utterly committed to working with them in terms of federal state. And within the parliament, if there are people that want to work with us, I'm happy to do so. And there were some people like Trent Zimmerman, who he and I would talk on stuff, and when Wyatt was there, Roy, we would work together, and he was really good at with stuff that was coming up, letting us know from a legislative perspective, and working through together collaboratively on that. And I'm absolutely committed to doing that as well and factoring stuff in, because I think you get stronger policy outcomes. At a time where we're talking about the value of diversity in leading to better outcomes, it would be hypocritical of me not to do the same when it comes to different points of view. There will be things we disagree on, absolutely. I don't think that's a bad thing, that competitive tension that's there, but from my own point of view, I've said it to you all, it's on the record now, I am very much committed to that as a working approach.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can everyone thank you?
Thanks everyone. I got it. It's going to be a bad look, but I actually have to go. I'm not escaping. See ya.
And so concludes TechLeaders 2022. Thank you all very much for coming. I'm glad that we decided to do this again. I think the feedback that I've gotten today suggests that it's been worthwhile for most of you at least. So thank you very much, and we're going to try and make this an annual event again. Do our very, very best to do that. So please go out and share that message that this is a worthwhile thing. We'd very much appreciate that. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Phil.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Phil.